Now, this room that we're in right now is, of course, the biggest room that's in the museum and changes probably the most frequently. Of course, we have both of our art shows in this wonderful chamber, but we also have the examples of the wonderful Cheyenne carriage collection, like we have with these two examples behind me. We'll be showing you some others. But I wanted to use these two to start talking about what's on display here inside the museum and will be through the rest of 2025. What we have is a collection and assortment of vehicles that began to be collected by Cheyenne Frontier Days beginning in 1927. That's specifically the year that parade's chairman, George Jones, asked people to donate their carriages to Cheyenne Frontier Days to create a brand new type of parade. We had always had parades since 1897 all the way up to that point, but he wanted, with the help of Margaret Boyce and the women who would eventually become known as the Wheels, to create a spectacle that would draw people to Wyoming and give them something they couldn't find anywhere else on earth. In 1927, he asked people to donate carriages that they had laying around in their houses, barns, carriage houses, garages, and they wanted to bring them into the parade so they could be used. Of course, many of these vehicles that we have were not being used any longer because people had switched to the automobile, which was now beginning to dominate human transportation at that time. But there were still enough people that had horses and knew how to hitch wagons to make this possible. The two vehicles that I have behind me kind of represent the two types of vehicles that you're going to see while you're inside the Old West Museum. This little vehicle is actually one of the newest carriages in the carriage collection, made specifically by Cheyenne Frontier Days around 1960. They did this as a 3/4 size stagecoach as kind of a gimmick for miniature horses. But anyway, it shows you some of the original old ways that people used to build our vehicles for horse-drawn transportation across the West. If you look at this vehicle, there's some things that are very important. I'm going to go back to point these out. Stagecoach shows you some technologies that are very, very ancient. The very first carriage that we would recognize was probably built around 500 AD. Some of the things that happen with all those vehicles is obviously you have axles with wheels, but then to go ahead and house the body of the vehicle, they actually had a suspension. In this case, you have these rails and you have what's called a through brace that runs across through the bottom. And the body of the carriage actually sits on the suspension and bounces around independently for the wheels. The other thing that's important about this vehicle, as you might notice from front to the back, the axles are basically attached to one another. Now, this is a very old piece of technology that keeps the whole vehicle together and makes it incredibly durable. You'll see this on a lot of vehicles inside the carriage hall. The other vehicle we have right here is this wonderful VIP carriage. This is a wonderful little Victorian that is a different type of vehicle. Beginning about 1812, a guy by the name of Obadiah Elliott invented something that would change carriages forever, and that is the metal spring. So Obadiah Smith's special spring and the tough steel that could be used to create it. The sky was the limit on how carriages could be designed. Like, for instance, if you notice underneath, the axles are not attached to each other. They're actually attached through the body of the vehicle with the steel that actually allows it to be bent to get the shape that it has. So that part of the vehicle disappears. Then you also have these wonderful springs that allow the vehicle to be better supported, and it's far cheaper and easier to replace back east. But the people of Cheyenne, beginning in 1867, when the city was founded, were able to rely on vehicles like this with all of these modern innovations that basically get reflected on things like this tiny little vehicle that you see here. When we start getting into the time period about the mid-1860s, the era after the Civil War, we're getting into something known as the Second American Industrial Revolution. And we are able to produce vehicles like this by the hundreds, if not the thousands. Where this vehicle, when it was originally created, was made by hand, factories could turn out hundreds or thousands of these vehicles that you could order from, well, not only from the showroom, because they had showrooms just like we have for cars and dealerships in the major cities, but if you're lucky enough to have a Montgomery Ward's or Sears catalog, you could order a wagon in a kit and they would ship it to you by train in a crate, and then they could deliver it to your house or to a local blacksmith shop, and they could put it together for you. So this is a very interesting thing where we are already getting into the modern age with these vehicles. And it's these vehicles that we have here in our collection that are primarily from that time period, about 1867 to about 1910, before the automobile started replacing them. And these are the ultimate expression of horse-drawn vehicles to be found anywhere on Earth. The nice part is Cheyenne Frontier Days has been able to collect 160 of these vehicles, and almost all of them actually come from our area. They represent the way people worked, the way people played, the way that people were able to go about their daily lives is reflected in the vehicles we have in this collection. We're not the largest carriage collection in the world. There are several that are larger than us, but we are unique in the fact that most of these vehicles come from here and were used by people in Cheyenne or Wyoming for our environment. And so that's what makes this collection unique. And then, of course, throw on top of that, that this is one of the largest working carriage collections in the world. And as you go through, you might notice some of the vehicles we're going to point out have white numbers on them. Those vehicles are used in parades every year.